Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of the Emerald Coast, a covenantal community founded on loving kindness and a common devotion to our free faith. I'm devotion to our free faith. I'm honored to serve as the minister here. My pronoun. I'm at my home in Birmingham, enjoying this month off. I want to offer a special welcome to those visiting with us today, in person and virtually. We are delighted you chose to join us. Today, we hope to touch hearts, to teach minds, to challenge spirits, and comfort souls. May you find refreshment and restoration in our service today. And after the service, it's back to the pool.
Well, good morning. I'm Shar Farley. I'm a member of this congregation and your service leader this morning. If you're visiting us today and a newcomer to Unitarian Universalist Fellowship or Unitarian Universalist, I've got fellowship on my mind here this morning. We hope that you'll stay after our worship service and meet up with us at the rear of the sanctuary for coffee and light refreshments. At about 11:15, we invite you to join us in one of our small adult group discussions that are listed in your order of service. Port Swain will meet here at the front of the sanctuary, and we'll be discussing our responses to our guest speaker's message this morning. And in the library, Josh Ashley will meet and for Extra Extra, and our discussions in this group center around major headlines, news headlines, and our UU response to them. And now we have a special announcement from our president of our fellowship, Baron Williams.
Good morning, everybody. Do have some sad news and just want to officially share it with the congregation. It has been disseminated with Reverend Ruth. We have to share with our sadness that Bill Campbell passed earlier last week. We have our caring committee attending to the family and the companions. We have Reese Howley to keep in our thoughts. That was his companion and his twin brother, Bobby Campbell. So we want to thank our caring committee and our minister for reaching out to the survivors. And if we do have congregants who wish to share their condolences, to reach out to the caring committee as well. Because of the timing of it, we do not have a pressing need to start the service, to have a service immediately. So in good time, we will have a service to honor his memory. If you have any concerns or things that you would like to have included for that service, please reach out to me, and I can in turn work with our minister, who we're trying to cordon off as much as we can for her vacation time while also attending to this important matter. We can have just a moment of silence before we continue the rest of the service. Thank you.
Just another announcement about an upcoming service that will be happening on July the 30th. Our guest speaker that day will be Dustin Borlak, a world-class musician, and Dustin has been facilitating sound healing workshops for the past 8 years. Driven by his own powerful experiences with conscious breathing and sound healing, he is inspired more than ever to share his potency of these practices with us. Please check your order of service for other announcements and other upcoming worship services. Since our minister, Reverend Ruth Lillian, is on summer vacation, our speaker this morning will be one of our own UUFEC members, Joshua Moore. Joshua is a member of our Religious Services Committee and the choir. He and Jennifer Doyle, Vice President of our UUFEC Board of Trustees, were delegates to the annual Unitarian Universalist General Assembly. The GA, as we refer to it, is an annual gathering in June of Unitarian Universalist congregations of the UU Association, who are scattered all over the world. This year, more than 3,200 UUs from 50 states and 597 congregations came together in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, either virtually or in person. They worshiped, learned, connected, and made policy. Joshua will share with us his perspective of the assembly. And now, the prelude prepares us for the service. Shua Moore will light our chalice this morning. Shua? Our words this morning were written by K. Sivani Guilford. We call forth the life of our faith by igniting a chalice. This spark of new beginnings invites us into a sacred space to reflect where we have been and where we are going. Even knowing that this particular flame will intentionally end with our mutual extinguishing, we fear not its end, for we know with brave hearts that from everything, by every ending of our lives, we are sent forth to make a new beginning. Please join us now in the opening hymn. It is number 6, Just As Long As I Have Breath, in your gray hymnal.
Yes to my
It's time for all ages, and the children are invited to come forth to hear our story today. Good. The name of our story today is The Prince with a Lot to Learn. And this story teaches us an important lesson. So let's listen up and find out if we know what was taught to the prince. Once upon a time, there was a young prince who lived in a lavish palace in the desert. He loved to play all day with his friends. That is, until one day, a stranger appeared and everything changed his life. The prince was having a fun time playing with his friends when they heard a knock on the big wooden door. They stopped their games because it was quite unusual to have visitors. "Let's go and see who it is," said the prince. A servant answered the door, and there stood a tall, bearded man, simply dressed, looking down upon the prince with a twinkle in his eye. And I think we have the bearded man and the young prince. "Good morning, sir," said the prince. "Have you come to see my father, the king?" "Good morning, your highness." "No, I'm actually here to see you. I'm going to be your teacher." When the prince heard that word, his smile faded. "I see," he said gravely. You see, his parents had he would have to learn all the things that a king should know. He was just surprised that the time had come so soon. The young prince bowed to the teacher, and the man bowed in return. And then his new teacher followed the servant to be presented to the king. That night, when the queen tucked the young prince into bed, she noticed that he was unusually quiet. She looked into his eyes and said, "My dear son, you're growing into a man. When your father and I become too old to rule, our great nation will be in your hands." "But I don't want to grow up," he replied. "I know," she said, as she kissed him goodnight, "but everything will be just fine." From that time on, the prince spent his days learning about his country and the world beyond. He was introduced to important people and observed the father at work. In short, he was taught everything he needed to be worthy to be a king. Years passed, and the prince grew tall, strong, and wise. Then one day, the teacher calmly closed his book and said, "Your Highness, I have taught you all I know, and my work here is done. It's time for me to leave." The prince had always known that this day would come, yet he loved and respected his teacher so much that he begged him to stay. But the teacher gently said it was time to move on. The prince wept as his teacher departed. The queen wiped away his tears, saying, "Be at peace. Everything has its time, and nothing lasts forever. Your days of study are over, and soon you will be king." Before long, the prince was indeed king. He married a princess from a distant land, and they had a beautiful daughter. One day, when the princess was playing with her friends, there was a knock on the door. "Let's go and see who it is," she shouted. The door opened, and standing there was a tall, bearded, simply dressed man looking down at her with a twinkle in his eye. Now, who do you think that bearded man was going to do? Shua? A teacher, yes, is going to teach the young princess maybe how to take over the kingdom, because that was their only son, only child. So she would be queen. And the lesson is that, it's only natural sometimes that we want things to just stay the same, right? But our story tells us that life is a journey and change is inevitable. Our lesson is to enjoy every moment of life while you're living it, right? Well, that's our story, and thank you for listening. And be on the watch for change in your own life. Sometimes it's usually good. Now, you are invited to briefly share personal events in your life by dropping a pebble in the bowl and, and by speaking a few words into the microphone. Let us support each other in sorrows and celebrate together in joy. This is a sacred time. let's pause for a moment in silent prayer or meditation. And afterwards, I will close with a few words from Janice Marie Johnson. We are often called to do the difficult, if not the seemingly impossible, and it is vital to our spiritual growth that we do not ignore these challenges. After our song of dedication, the greeters will take our offering. Generosity is a spiritual practice. Our fellowship is supported by our pledges and donations. And if you're paying your pledge with a check today, please make a note of it in the memo line. Our Share the Plate partner this month is Niceville Caring and Sharing. All cash and checks with the Share the Plate, or STP, in the memo line will be equally shared with this local charity. Niceville Sharing and Caring is an all-volunteer organization that strives to coordinate the emergency needs of families in our area. They provide food, help with rent and utilities, school supplies, and other needs. Please be as generous as you are able.
can see Jen and our Reverend Ruth Van Lillian there at GA. Thank you for sharing those pictures with us, Jen. Hi, as Shara said before, I'm Josh Moore. So what is a Unitarian Universalist? What is Unitarian Universalism? Has anyone ever asked you that before? I'm sure that if you've come here long enough, they have. Maybe someone did this morning. Or maybe, what do Unitarian Universalists believe in? Maybe some of you are asking that question right now. It's likely that if you have been asked one of these questions or anything similar, that you might have referred to our 7 principles, along with our sources. I've done this myself, and as I understand it, it's incredibly common among UUs, and there's a good reason for it. As Unitarian Universalists, we are what we like to call a non-creedal faith. To early Unitarians and early Universalists, and later to UUs as a whole, after the merger, this aspect has been an integral part of defining our free faith. It was important to those who came before us that no free person should have to swear an oath or creed to be part of a congregation like this one. No dogma or doctrine had to be accepted for membership or for fellowship or ministerial guidance. This deep commitment to the freedom of individuals to find their own path has been guarded and kept at the center of what we do. This commitment was put to the test when 2 of America's most liberal faiths, Unitarians and Universalists, agreed to a merger in 1961. This new body, the Unitarian Universalist Association, naturally would need to define itself somehow, and I think you can imagine that process wasn't easy. Neither Unitarians nor Universalists wanted to lose what they felt was essential to their faith. And many worried that one side might consume the other, or that the merger just wouldn't last, or that it would cause even more division. We UUs are nothing if not opinionated, and also more than willing to discuss those opinions at length. So, after much dramatic debate and deep consideration, the UUA approved what was then 6 principles. It was a statement of purpose, not only including cherished values like the supreme worth of every human personality and the disciplined search for truth, as well as a dedication to a free faith, but also practical matters, like number 5, to serve the needs of member churches and fellowships, to organize new churches and fellowships, and to extend and strengthen liberal religion. And this kind of thing makes sense, right? Even in a free faith, it makes sense to have some sort of statement about our association as a unified denomination of congregations about who we intend to be. But it's important to note that in 1961, the UUA was relatively sparse with the wording that they did include. As I said before, many were still worried that this could amount to a creed by some standards. And the language they used was noticeably gendered. This, among other concerns, were what led to the campaign to amend the principles, which culminated in 1985, with the adoption of what we now call the 7 principles, which is technically known as Section C-21 principles in the UUA bylaws, to be clear. In 1985, Unitarian Universalism as a unified association had grown and evolved in the 24 years since the merger. UU women within the UUA, particularly the UU Women's Federation, pushed for change to the language of our bylaws to address not only gendered language of the 6 principles, words like brotherhood and man, but also to remove specific language invoking God, as well as adding language around interdependence and theological diversity. It had become apparent that the old principles were no longer sufficient. They were no longer useful in the way that they were intended. And many felt that they needed to be updated. And since we are dedicated to a free and democratic process, as some have called a living faith, the 6 principles were updated and incorporated into the 7 principles and sources in the form that I am sure many of you are familiar with. It's actually in a version of it is in here, if you want to look at it, and a version is right there on our wall too. And they have served us well, I believe, but they were never meant to be permanent, not written in stone, not untouchable. It was understood in 1985 and explicitly stated, as it was in 1961, that these principles were meant to be reevaluated someday. Someday, we might outgrow them, just as we outgrew the 6 principles. Sometimes, change is slow. And while minor changes were made to the principles over the years, there were no significant changes to the document as a whole. As decades passed, the world turned. And once again, calls swelled up from inside our congregations that we evolve. In 1985, the push was largely led by women in an attempt to create a faith that was explicitly more inclusive and supportive of women. In the 2010s, the rise of bigotry, misogyny, homophobia, hate of all kinds inspired many UUs to actively stand against these oppressive ideologies and confront them, not just in the world at large, but within our own movement. Much of this activist energy gathered around the push for the addition of an 8th principle, which, in the words of our now former president Susan Frederick Gray, recognized the need to go beyond aspirational principles to articulate commitments to dismantle systems of oppression, calling us from aspiration to action. From aspiration to action. So in 2020, the UUA appointed the Article 2 Study Commission to enable our UUA, our member congregations, and our covenanted communities to be a relevant and powerful force for spiritual and moral growth, healing, and justice. That commission spent 2.5 years of study and conversation with thousands of UUs in many congregations across the country. And in January of 2023, they submitted their report and their proposed changes. And I'm sorry if this seems all a bit too in the weeds. I think it is important. Those changes were then brought to the 2023 General Assembly of the UUA that was just held in Pittsburgh and was attended by our minister, Ruth Van Lillian, and member delegate Jennifer Doyle. I was also chosen as a delegate by this congregation and was initially planning on attending in person before the universe had other plans, as it often does. However, I was able to attend and vote online and am now able to report of the most significant changes to our bylaws since 1985. The proposed overhaul of the principles was certainly not the only important issue brought up this year, I will say, at the GA. A strong contingent of young and active climate activists fought hard this year to pass a proposal that would divest all UUA funds from any investment in fossil fuel industries or any other venture that does not specifically align with our values. Though it is too much to get into and pulls in a much-needed discussion about reparations, I will say that their proposal did not pass in its current form. However, the push for divestment continues and will be a huge conversation going forward. Other things were, of course, discussed, as all of our major business is handled at the GA, out in the open, where the matters can be discussed in the light of day. And much as it was during the merger in 1961, and also in 1985 with the adoption of the 7 Principles, there was much debate about this proposal. Some were opposed to the changing the principles at all, in favor of keeping something that has served us well enough. Others were fine with updating the language, but felt like the new proposal, the core of which is called the values and covenant, went too far, or not far enough. And so, as we are dedicated to the democratic process, amendments were submitted and discussed and voted on. Many were voted down, but 5 of them passed, and I have that list you guys can look at later. It's an interesting list of amendments. Already, you can see the process, the language is being honed and changed, with more changes still yet to come. Finally, on the proposal as a whole came to a vote. And to be clear, really clear, this was not a vote to accept the proposal as it is, but to instead to continue the conversation and debate around the specific wording within our individual congregations as well as the UUA at large. So there will be a whole year to iron out the final wording, but even that will have to be updated someday, of course. Now, I won't belabor the point anymore. The vote passed, but that doesn't mean that we just throw away the 7 principles. We don't have to take them down off the wall. One thing that was very clear to me when hearing the words of UU delegates from all over, speaking either for or against the new changes, that they all held the principles very dear to them. It isn't something done lightly, callously, and I hope this comforts some to hear. Just as all that was good in the 6 principles was updated and incorporated into the 7 principles, so too have the 7 principles been updated and incorporated into our values and covenant. And Rose, if you would, show the slide here. Here we go. Here's a diagram. And here they all are, our values, all circling love at the center. And now I'd like to read you these proposed changes, and I will remind you that some of these words might change going forward. You might even have a hand in changing them if you want. You can talk to me about it, and we'll get involved. But as of now, this is what was voted on. And as I am reading, I would ask you, pay close attention to how the language of covenant takes our values from a place of aspiration to action. The Unitarian Universalist Association will devote its resources and the use of its organizational powers for religious education and humanitarian purposes. Its primary purposes are to assist congregations in their vital ministries, support and train leaders, both lay and professional, to foster lifelong faith formation and spiritual development, to heal historic injustices, to support and encourage the creation of new UU communities, and to advance our UU values in the world. The purpose of the UUA is to actively engage its members in the transformation of the world through liberating love. As Unitarian Universalists, we covenant, congregation to congregation, and through our association to support and assist one another in our ministries. We draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love. Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Inseparable from one another, these shared values are interdependence. We honor the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. With humility and reverence, we covenant to protect the earth and all beings from exploitation, nurturing sustainable relationships of repair, mutuality, and justice. Pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Justice. We work to be a diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive, democratic processes to make decisions. Transformation. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. Generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, our presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. Equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. And our inspirations. As Unitarian Universalists, we use and are inspired by sacred and secular understandings that help us live into our values. We respect the histories, contexts, and cultures in which they were created and are currently practiced. These sources ground us and sustain us in ordinary, difficult, and joyous times. Grateful for the religious ancestries we inherit and the diversity which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom. Inclusion. Systems of power and privilege and oppression have traditionally created barriers for persons and groups with particular identities, ages, abilities, and histories. We pledge to replace such barriers with ever-widening circles of solidarity and mutual respect. We strive to be an association of congregations that truly welcome all persons who share our values. We commit to being an association of congregations that empowers and enhances everyone's participation, especially those with historically marginalized identities. And finally, a section called Freedom of Belief. Congressional freedom and the individual's right of conscience are central to our Unitarian Universalist heritage. Congregations may establish statements of purpose, covenants, and bonds of union so long as they do not require that members adhere to a particular creed. And there it is. At the end, a reaffirmation of our non-creedal faith. A reminder that this, too, is not sacred. It's not going to last forever, nor should it. May it be so, and amen.
Joshua's given us a lot to think about, and if you want to pursue that, join us in the front of the sanctuary for Port Swing today. And now let's sing all together, For All That Is Our Life, number 128 in your hymnal.
Please
Our closing words are from K.R. Warren. May love that is the doctrine of this church be also the strength and spirit of this congregation and of our individual lives. Please remain seated for the postlude. And now, coffee and light refreshments. Thank you.